paralysis within the East African Legislative Assembly due to Kenya's unresolved nominations. Also, Burundi's angry reaction on that UN report indicting senior government officials. Plus, an insightful conversation on the cost of prolonged electoral cycles in Africa. Welcome to Bottomline Africa once again. My name is Yusuf Ibrahim. And before we go to our top story, once again, we're going to revisit our top story. Let me introduce our panel, our power panel tonight, composed of political analyst Mark Bichachi. He will be together with Felix Oketechu, who is a multilateral trade expert, as well as Daniel Juma, who is the executive director of Global Peace Foundation. We're going to link up with Abdullahi Buru from New York as well. Of course, the program continues right here on KTN News. Now, let us revisit our top story, where the Jubilee Party wrote to the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission rejecting the new lineup of Secretariat staff named to oversee the presidential rerun. In a response letter to the Jubilee Party, IEBC Chairman Ofula Chebukati said the electoral body is an independent institution that shall not be subject to direction or control by any person or authority. The letter went on to say that it was unacceptable for Jubilee to provide names of IEBC staff that they considered partisan, and further to suggest that they be dropped from the project. In an earlier letter to the IEBC, Jubilee listed 9 names of IEBC staff they said were openly partisan. The NASA coalition, on the other hand, has constantly insisted that the IEBC makes changes to the Secretariat before we go for yet another election. Well, over to some development of the East African Assembly. Now, inauguration of the East African Legislative Assembly, well known as YALA, is yet to take place and could be further delayed up until October, despite the fact that the Assembly is already 3 months behind schedule. Now, the delay has been caused by Kenya's nomination standoff, although Kenya's 12th Parliament commenced business last week. Election of the YALA MPs is likely to take time. The regional body postponed the June swearing in of a new parliament to give Kenya time to resolve the nominations dispute. This is not the first time Kenya has delayed the YALA timelines over unresolved dispute. All other East Africa Cooperation member states have already forwarded their names to the Assembly. YALA, legislative organ of the East African Community, cannot be constituted until all the 6 partner states have representatives. Now, just to tell us more on that story, I'm now joined by the outgoing YALA Speaker, Daniel Kidega from Kampala in Uganda. Now, Daniel, shall I call you Mr. Speaker, sir, or former Speaker, sir? You're going to tell us whether you're going to defend that seat. But for now, we understand that there are delays. Is this delay being caused by, the lack of representatives from Kenya?
Yes, thank you so much. Of course, you can refer to me as Speaker Emeritus because my term as Speaker ended in June. And there is supposed to be a new Speaker in office, but because of this hiccup, the office is still vacant.
Well, I understand that this Assembly cannot fully reconstituted up until all the representatives from all these 6 member states are going to be represented. And Kenya is yet to forward its names. So what is your next plan of action?
Yeah, thank you so much, viewers out there. Of course, it is regrettable that the takeoff of the 4th Assembly has been completely failed to take off because of Kenya failing to send their representative, and originally also South Sudan having a foul start on how they elected their representatives. South Sudan has already corrected the mistake. They have forwarded the names to Arusha. All the other 5 partner states have, and Kenya hasn't. And for us, we know for a fact that the democratic process of obtaining in Kenya has had challenges, but I know also for a fact that this lull or this failure for the 4th Assembly to take off could have been avoided if the elections of the representative were done at the time when notice was given to the Parliament of Kenya. But not too late, although we have lost a lot of time, it is our plea to the political leadership, particularly of the National Assembly, to make sure that they hasten the process of electing the representative and forwarding the name to Arusha. This lull has caused the integration process a delay or a setback because, you know, the East African integration is premised on the principle of separation of powers, where we have a legislature, which is Yala, the judiciary, which is the East African Court of Justice, and the executive, comprising of the Council of Ministers and the Secretariat. Now, the entire community is operating without a parliament, and therefore there is no oversight obtaining, and there are many things not going on the side of Parliament. I think this is something that needs to be corrected very urgently.
Clearly, something needs to be corrected there, Daniel. Daniel, one final question. Clearly, the Assembly has waited since June, and now we are in September, and I'm sure the other representatives from the other countries have their targets, and they need to make legislations that are going, of course, to help the East African region. Have they managed to give some sort of a deadline to Kenya?
The deadline to Kenya was given many months before the lapse of the Third Assembly by the clerk to the Assembly. The treaty is very clear. It gives timeline when partner states should do election.
Yes.
And this communication was sent to the National Assembly of Kenya in time. But viewers out there may want to know that it is the politics that was obtaining just before the general elections that made it impossible for the representative to be elected. But now that the parliamentarians have been elected, our appeal is that the process as laid down in the treaty for the establishment of the East African community be followed and urgently taken up front by the Parliament of Kenya and send their representative as soon as possible to rescue the delay of the integration agenda of the EAC.
Now, Daniel, hypothetically speaking, let's say Kenya forwards its names to the Assembly. Are you going to defend your seat?
I beg your pardon?
I'm saying once Kenya resolves its nomination problems, and sends its name to the Assembly, are you going to defend your seat as the Yala Speaker?
Oh, yes. Immediately the Kenyan send their 9 representatives. The 4th Assembly will be constituted and a new Parliament will take off, and they will begin with elections of the new Speaker. And as you may be aware, the Republic of Rwanda is providing the speakership this time round. They will elect a speaker and constitute the various committee of the Assembly, and the Assembly will take off. What needs to be understood outside there by the viewers is that the treaty time or the mandatory time of the Assembly, which is 5 years, shall not be eaten into by this lull. And this is not the first time we are experiencing this. In 2007, still we had issues with the representative from the Republic of Kenya, and we had a lull for actually close to 6 months. And the Third Assembly was delayed. And when it took off, it took and worked for its 5 years mandate.
Clearly, I hope they are watching and listening. Many thanks, Daniel, for that. That was Daniel Ikeda, the immediate former Speaker of the East Africa Legislative Assembly, is telling us the operations there have totally been paralyzed because Kenya is yet to unresolve its nomination headache. They had to send its representatives to that sitting. Now, over to Angola, where the Electoral Commission has just announced that the MPLA in power, that is the party in power since 1975, won last month's general election with 61.7% of the vote. Commission President Andre da Silva Neto said that the MPLA's João Lourenço is now president-elect, replacing José Eduardo dos Santos, who has been president since 1979. Lourenço will be inaugurated as the country's first new president since 1979 on 25th of September this year. According to the results, the MPLA party has won a landslide with 150 members of parliament, representing 61.7% of the assembly. The opposition, UNITA party, have a total of 51 MPs. The election saw the end of outgoing President Dos Santos' 38-year rule. Dos Santos proceeds to retirement now. Over to Syria now, where millions of Somalis still live in the diaspora after fleeing more than 20 years of conflict. Ironically, some found themselves in equally traumatizing territories riddled by war. Here's the story of a group of Somalis who escaped conflict at home, only to end up in the middle of the Syrian conflict. Take a look.
Zahra fled Somalia in 2012 to find refuge in Damascus. Despite the conflict flaring in Syria at the time, she decided to stay on, fearing even more the situation back home, where her daughter was raped and killed.
No country closer to Somalia was safe enough for us to go. There was only Syria. When we arrived here, they didn't ask for a visa or anything. We climbed down from the plane and walked out of the airport.
In 6 years of war, millions of Syrians have been forced to flee their country. But some foreign refugees in Damascus say they had no choice but to stay. Most of them arrived before the beginning of the conflict.
Syria has produced many refugees, and many Syrians are also displaced within the country. But Syria has also welcomed 35,000 refugees, mainly from Iraq, South Sudan and Somalia.
On top of this, more than 20,000 Iraqis have arrived in Syria since the beginning of the offensive to retake Mosul from the Islamic State group. Fatin is a Chaldean Christian and fled Iraq's sectarian conflict in 2007. Her husband has lived in Damascus for 18 years, and because Syria never recognized South Sudan's recent independence, he has no official ID.
When we arrived here, the situation was good. I married a man whose country is also at war and where the situation is terrible. We hoped that the United Nations would help us get out of here, but all our requests have been denied. It's dramatic because the situation got bad here as well. Wherever we go, it gets worse. We don't know what to do.
Some refugees say they nearly got caught in the fighting near Damascus. But this small suburban church is a haven of peace, away from two wars, the one they left behind, and the one looming over them daily in Syria.
Now over to developments in Burundi, where the Burundi government has firmly rejected allegations of crimes against humanity, accusing the United Nations investigators of being mercenaries in a Western plot to enslave African states. UN investigators on Monday accused Burundi's government of crimes against humanity, including executions and torture, and urged the International Criminal Court to open a case as soon as possible. The United Nations Commissions of Inquiry on Burundi said it had reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed and continue to be committed in Burundi, pointing a finger at the highest level of this state. Now, joining me from Kampala, Uganda, is my colleague Solomon Serawanja. Solomon, good evening. Good to see you. Welcome to the program. I understand you have an ambassador from Burundi. I do hope you have some tough questions for him because there's so many damning allegations in that UN report.
Well, Yusuf, damning allegations indeed, because if the International Criminal Court really opens up charges, they need to do this fast because, remember, Burundi will start its evacuation from the International Criminal Court on the 27th of October, which means that if they get out of the International Criminal Court, it basically means that the UN Security Council is the one that can open up any charges against Burundi for crimes committed against humanity. All right, so tonight, to help us understand what Burundi's statement and stand is on this report that was written by the Commission of Inquiries is Jean Bosco Barege joining us right now. All right, thank you so much for joining us, Your Excellency. Let's start with your response to this report that was conducted by the Commission of Inquiry that the United Nations appointed to look into the Burundi crisis.
Thank you very much, Solomon Sewanja, for giving me this opportunity on this report, which has been done by the three experts. First of all, this Commission of Inquiry was a diktat of European Union, which has been imposed on Burundi unjustly. The government of Burundi has never accepted this Commission of Inquiry because it has not come through a consensus.
Well, it was instituted by the United Nations. You didn't have to accept.
Yeah, of course, because Burundi, you may recall, Burundi is a member. It is sitting on the Commission on Human Rights. It will go till next year as a member. So how can you impose? This shows this double standard when one party is imposing, because this is in the line of regime change that these European countries has tried to put on Burundi. When they failed, you remember there have been insurgents, there have been a coup, a military coup. All these failed, and now they are using this tool.
Well, Your Excellency, the report clearly says that your government was involved in crimes against humanity. Over 500 people were interviewed, and they said that government was part of, you know, the extrajudicial killings and rape and disappearances.
That's what I'm telling you, that this is politically motivated, because they failed by insurgency, they failed by military coup. Now they have tried to invent that they can use ICC as a political tool to subjugate Burundi and other African countries. You may recall what happened in Libya and other countries. So, for the government of Burundi, till now, the country is stable, the country is peaceful, and there are a lot of evidences which can prove this. You can ask your third deputy prime minister here, who was in Bujumbura for the EAC military games in the country. So, what kind of this instability that the three experts are talking about, whereas they have never been to Burundi and me?
But you refused them to get into the country.
Because it has been done by imposition. They have dictated this. And we cannot accept a sovereign country to be imposed different actions. Well, as if we are a kids, they tell you kneel down, you get up, you lie down. No, we are a full member of United Nations. We have all rights that every country, whether American, European, we are all equal. So we have to follow all
Solomon,
regulations
it
and
seems
really
it's
come up
a very
with
interesting discussion there, Solomon. Of course, the
Your
Burundian
Excellency,
government official there.
but let me just ask you one more question. So the report recommends that the International Criminal Court investigates the government of Burundi for crimes against humanity, and yet you're already planning to withdraw out of the court. Is the progress still going on for getting out of the International Criminal Court?
Yes, we have already notified this, that we have decided to quit. And the reason that these people are pushing is only that, so that they can say how they can catch Burundi and bring it down. But with the unity of the people of Burundi, this will not be done. Because why insisting on this? Well, the country is stable. Tell me a country which is perfect in this world in the matter of human rights, where you don't find any problem. So we have to sit together and discuss and find solutions.
We need to get away. Thank you so much, Honorable Jean Barije, for joining us. All right, Yusuf, that's the ambassador for Burundi in Uganda, speaking to us about the decision that was made by the three-member committee that was looking into the investigations into the Burundi crisis. Back to you, Yusuf.
Thank you very much, Solomon, for that heated discussion, I must say, at a time when Burundian government is still denying that report by the United Nations. Of course, they're questioning the methodologies these researchers used at a time when they have denied these researchers to even set foot in Burundi. Now, it's about time we get into our discussion tonight. It has everything to do with prolonged election and Africa and the effect it has on economy, not just economy, but as well as security. And in studio, let me introduce my guests once again. We have Mark Bichachi, who is a political analyst, then Daniel Juma, who is the executive director of Global Peace Foundation, as well as Felix Okach from the multilateral. He is a multilateral trade expert. Good evening, all of you, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Yusuf.
Let let me start with you, Mark. I'm sure you've had experience not just in Kenya, but in other African countries. It seems the word tension is almost synonymous with elections in Africa.
You know, the funniest thing, the levels of tension vary from country to country. For example, if you go to South Africa, there's not much tension because in their history, they've already defeated apartheid. They do not carry it on. If you look at Namibia as another example, they also defeated apartheid in the 90s, and they do not have the same issues. Tanzania, which is our close neighbor, where there was a bit of tension in terms of when they were looking to see whether Chadema would finally dethrone Chama cha Mapinduzi, there was still relative peace. In Kenya, what happens, which is interesting, Kenya has the unique ability of acting as though we've just recovered from a huge fight and at the same time having experienced peace for a very long time. And this is stems from the fact that Kenya has this tendency of running campaigns that are not based on issues. And when you run a campaign that's not based on issues and it's based on personalities, then what people feel like is if my personality does not make it, then I'm already in trouble. And that's really what causes the tension in Kenya. And this
is where I want to bring Felix into this discussion. Felix, I understand you're a multilateral trade expert. You've seen what has been happening in the country for the last 2 months. What is your reading of this year's election? Has it affected the economy in any way?
I didn't hear well.
I'm asking, of course, you've been seeing developments in Kenya as far as this year's election is concerned. There are those who are saying the country has made losses in the stock exchange. You know, investors are shying away. So how much of a damage has this year's election been to Kenya's economy?
If you're talking about Kenya's economy or issues of trade, you start from the statistics.
Yes.
Going by leading economic indicators, which was for the June, it shows that inflation has gone down from 11% to 7%. That means there's improvement. The Nairobi Stock Exchange index has gone up.
Yes.
So that means we have not suffered much.
But
tourism sector, hotel accommodation has increased. The figures we're
getting from NSE is that cumulatively the market capitalization, you know, the NSE has made about 250 billion shillings in losses. And as far as coffee export is concerned, the country is losing about 12 billion shillings every month. That is since the campaign started up until we went for the election on August 8th. And now that we're going for a rerun, the market is still paralyzed.
If you talk of trade now, take the statistics recorded by Kenya Bureau of Statistics. That's what you bank on. But then if you look at the market as it is, even the prices of shares as last Friday have not gone down. So what are we talking about?
Okay, Daniel, it seems Felix is not in agreement with me, but let me just ask you this question, being somebody who is involved in peace in this country. Why is election a matter of life and death?
It's true, Yusuf. Elections in Africa has always been very emotional, and especially Kenya. Every election year, we have this problem of everything stopping, you know, just because people have to politic. And it's unfortunate that this happens, and especially now, when we are in the prolonged electoral season, I have had several businessmen complaining that there is no business. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who does to a company, says he has not had bookings for quite some time. So it depends on whom you're talking to. We are hoping, as a foundation, we have been working to inspire a resilient Kenya, a resilient nation that would withstand the shocks of elections. We want to be a country that do not have to stop whenever there is elections happening. Look at countries like Denmark, for example. Elections happen, you wouldn't even know that there's an election. People just vote, votes are counted simply, and they're added, and the winner is announced. But Kenya is a very, very complicated situation.
And not just Kenya, Daniel. And this question goes to Mark here. Angola's just announced its presidential election, and I'm sure you've been following developments there. They've announced their final result 1 month after they went to the polls. Does this happen anywhere else apart from Africa?
Actually, it only happens in Africa and some states in Southeast Asia and, you know, those newly founded states with still military regimes. Now, first, I'd like to congratulate my good friend Raphael Savimbi on being anointed MP again for his second term. But that being said, Angola is one of those countries that has had civil war until the late 90s. So for them, their democratic space is still very new. If you remember, the former president who was there has been there since the 1970s, and his daughter was the single biggest, largest owner of the petroleum in that country, and she was a billionaire, a dollar billionaire. So this country already was at jitters because they never thought they would be able to replace the outgoing president, Da Silva. And that tells you that the month they took is that process of trying to make sure that everything went above the board, because the surge from UNISA to be at 40%, having been affiliated with the late Savimbi, is a problem for the ruling party. And what you're going to see in future is UNISA and the other smaller parties that are coming up in Angola will come up and take over that democratic space within Angola. So in as much as they have not matured as much, that 40% for UNISA does tell you that Angola is on the path of recovery.
Before I come to you, Felix, I know we've disagreed earlier, but I'm sure we're going to agree before this show ends. And let's just bring in Abdullah Iburu from New York, who also has some views with regards to prolonged elections, which normally result to tension and has an effect in economies, not just in Kenya, but in so many other African countries. Let's listen into what he has to say.
Immediately after the Supreme Court announced that there will be a fresh election following the petition by NASA, the Nairobi Stock Exchange crashed and there was something close to 50 billion was lost. However, what we need to be very careful about is that how many people actually in Kenya have invested in this Nairobi Stock Exchange. So while I think the loss is, extremely significant, it is not spread very well. Again, it speaks to Kenya, where there is a serious income inequality aside from poverty, making things very difficult. So what we need to be very, very careful about in Kenya is that election, probably 6 months to the elections, most of the companies stop hiring, most of the people start going to, less people are beginning to go to work. We need to stop making election an existential problem and rather an exercise where people would go and elect their leaders for the next 5 years.
This is where I want to bring Felix in. I'm sure you have a lot of experience as far as, trade and, economy is concerned. Do you think there's some sort of relationship between, economies in these African countries doing badly, especially when these countries go to an election?
Yes, me? Me to answer? You see, Kenya, don't even compare Kenya to a country like Angola. Because Angola, over 80% of the income is the export of crude oil. But Kenya, it's a big economy. Export of tea, coffee, flowers, and even services. You remember the time when we had elections, our Kenyans were busy winning marathon races in London, but we were busy campaigning. That did not make the economy not survive. Hotel industry has been recorded increased activity. When somebody says that, you see, election in Kenya, it's an event, although it's an event. But when the elections are occurring, there's a lot of activities at the domestic sector. People are traveling, politicians are giving them money. Money is circulating within the economy. And there are also other friends of Kenyans who are bringing money in the economy to assist in the election. So it's not that it has fallen. In fact, some businesses which have fallen, including some supermarkets I know of, it was not because of elections, they were before the elections. So Kenyan economy is quite strong enough. It can survive all the election and the presidential rerun.
So basically you're saying elections don't have impact on the economy. Now,
let me ask you a question. In fact, let me ask you a question. For example, the elections are going on in Kenya. It does not stop you going any part of the country, doing any business. The Matatu business is thriving. Education sector is going on, including agriculture. So,
but But Felix, for example, you know, the tea farms, coffee farms in central Kenya, most of these workers are from, for example, from Western Kenya. So because of election, and we know very well what happened in 2007, some of them don't go to work. So that will definitely have an effect on the economy. Don't you think so?
The tea farmer continues picking his tea and selling. The flower farmers continue sending flowers to Europe. By the way, the tea farms, the tea going to Europe, the demand there exceeds what we are supplying. So it's moving. Flowers is the same thing, it's moving. And the Kenyans, the economy are moving. So it's not the election, of course, in most African countries, election does cause disruption. But in Kenya, we've come of age. We are beyond that now. You saw in Britain, when they got out of Brexit, it was an issue that, oh, they're going to suffer. But they didn't suffer. They have gone over it. So even in Kenya, the elections have come. Presidential elections going to be repeated. But as it moves on, we will catch up.
Mark, do you agree with Felix that, you know, the economy, the situation, of course, as far as the economy of this country is concerned, is totally independent from elections?
I think Felix is trying to be a prophet of and say what is supposed to happen.
Felix, you'll have your time.
I think Felix is trying to be a prophet and say what is supposed to happen. But I'll remind Felix, for one, from the time we went to vote to the time Chebukati announced results and slightly afterwards, Kenyans did not go to work. And each day when Kenyans did not go to work, at least in Nairobi, which we know for sure didn't happen, that was a day lost in the revenue of the country. When
it's a blow.
Yeah, so the reality of the matter is where the macroeconomic factors may have remained constant, and I think our friend from New York put it very clearly, the macroeconomic factors in this country are affected, number one, by big business, and number two, by people who are expatriates. Therefore, that tells you, you can't be so sure that the economy is not affected. Ask the guy who goes to Mjengo and he doesn't have a job today.
Daniel, I'm sure you have seen the comments Kenyans make on social media. You know, the reason as to why we're using Kenya as an example is because we also have our own election here. You've seen the level of hate speech on social media, and most people are being brought to book. Do you think it's lack of, you know, having strong institutions, or what is your reasoning behind that?
Yes, we've monitored this social media, and indeed there's strong languages. You know, NASA and Jubilee supporters really criticizing each other on social media. Just like I said earlier on, it's an emotional situation. This indicts basically the organizations that are in charge of addressing issues of hate speech, NCIC. We know that Honorable Kaparo has been good at least he has been good at threatening, you know, threatening people, but there's been no action. Yeah, we would like a situation whereby institutions work. We are a democratic nation. We are a constitutional democracy. We want everybody to, you know, operate within the law. So if anybody is spreading hate speech, you know, I think there should be a way of addressing that issue so that the nation cannot be held at ransom with those who want to abuse one another on social media. But let me just add that there is a nexus between business, peace, and politics. As a foundation, this nexus is there. If you look at countries like now South Sudan or Burundi, where we have had prolonged electoral disputes, you know, it's difficult to find investors going into those countries. But Kenya is a unique situation, and we are hoping that so long as the institutions can keep working, I think we are going to remain a stable democracy. We will remain a resilient nation, and the nation will move on. We just hope that the next coming elections will be held as soon as possible. We call upon the IEBC and the stakeholders, their clans, let them agree on an election date so that we can have these elections and we can move on.
Well said, Daniel. Before I come to you, Felix, let's take a look at our Twitter poll tonight. And we did ask our viewers earlier if they believe that internal changes to the IEBC will result in a more credible presidential election. And 63% of you said no, 37% of you said yes. Let me quickly go through some of your feedback here. And at Amakanji Thomas says, no, IEBC Secretariat needs to be cleaned and dumped in committee prison. And then there's another one from Roberto Gillo who says, because of the poor economy and greed, money speaks louder than integrity, hence no transparency. And then let me just take two more. One from John Mudoni who says the move by IBC to do internal changes was meant to please one party rather than the will of Kenyans. I think I'll stop there, but I'm going to read some more feedback within this program. But for now, let's take a look at our African proverb tonight. There you go. You've seen that proverb. I'm sure you're going to understand it the way you can. But it's time for our editorial on the bottom line tonight, the paralysis that is within the East African Legislative Assembly due to what I want to refer to as lack of commission or omission on Kenya's part, that Kenya has not been able to agree on the 9 names of people to represent the country in the Regional Assembly is somewhat not surprising. Why do I say so? The push and pull that is synonymous with the country's political culture is one that is not easily understandable to many within our region. Kenya, no doubt, remains the East African regional hegemon, but for how long? In a nutshell, I want to qualify my statement by saying that the politics of greed and self-interest, that is the moral fiber of the Kenyan political culture, is not sustainable. Soon, the rest of East Africa will justifiably want to move on. As we speak, those who lost in the just concluded general election are already angling for jobs. There is bound to be even more increased interest in the 9 available Yala nomination slots. Mark this one. Now, the result, your guess is as good as mine. The cycle continues. The bottom line is that Kenyans sit in a unique opportunity to unlock the nomination impasse that has been at the East African Legislative Assembly for 3 months now. Kenya either wants to set an admirable example to the rest of the region or sit pretty on her own and let East Africa move on. That is the bottom line tonight. And of course, that brings us to the end of our show tonight. Many thanks. Mark Bichache, I wanted to get your final comment, but we are out of time. Thank you very much, Felix Okach, for your input, as well as Daniel Juma. And that brings us to the end of our program tonight. Make sure to join me again tomorrow, same place, same time. Remember, this program runs from Monday to Thursday from 10 to 11 p.m. Until tomorrow, bye-bye and enjoy the rest of the night.